Hey everyone, Hannah here. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Ethical Exits, the podcast that dives into everything M&A and explores how good companies grow and also how they exit. This episode is going to sound a little bit different. And it's a story I've been waiting to tell, a story that I think needs to be told. A deep dive narrative that follows one iconic American brand and how private equity quietly dismantled it from the inside out. This is the story of Toys R Us. A company so big, so beloved, and so dominant in its category that it should have been untouchable. But it wasn't. And this isn't just about one business. It's about a model, a system, designed to swallow companies whole, using public money and leaving devastation in its wake. Most people have no idea it's happening or how it works, and that's by design. So if you ever wondered how Wall Street really works behind the scenes, if you care about what happens when ownership is divorced from accountability, or if you're just tired of watching good companies get gutted, this one's for you. Let's get into it. And if you want to dig in deeper, I highly recommend Megan Greenwell's latest book, Bad Company, Private Equity and the Death of the American Dream. Pay it forward. Grab a copy from your local library or your favorite local bookstore. Maybe just not that one that you can find online. And if you love this episode, tell us why. Or if you've got another M&A story you want us to break down, let us know. Shoot us a note at ethicalexits.com. Hope you love it. Hey, Caitlin.
Hey.
You know what makes me really super sad, Caitlin?
What's that?
Walking through a dead mall, right? I mean, there's just something really eerie about it, and it's like becoming more and more commonplace where these civic centers, these centers of our communities, are no more, right? And how it's changing so dramatically, how we even interact with one another, like all those memories as a kid, like picture, put yourself back there, right? You're bored, you got $10 in your pocket, you put on your best outfit, right? Like your coolest shoes, maybe you buff them before you go, right? Make sure they're like really squeaky. And you meet up with a bunch of your friends and you're wandering around the mall, right? You're like going into different shops and hanging out and going to the food court. And the goal was like to hang out with your friends, to starve off boredom, and maybe to be seen by people that you wanted to be seen by, right?
I remember those days. Feels like yesterday.
Right? Like little love interest, or whatever but it's like the visceral feeling of it. It always comes back to like smells for me, right? So the smell of cheap popcorn, of the Cinnabon, little shop, or of Bath and Body Works. Seriously, cucumber melon, dude. Like that was the thing, right? Cucumber fucking melon, man. That was like the magic. And then like Orange Julius, like getting an Orange Julius, like there always seemed to be an Orange Julius, in any food court. And I don't even know what the hell is in an Orange Julius. I don't know what that was, but do you remember that?
Yes, I remember all of it. I remember every Friday night I would put on something from Limited 2 or Hot Topic, and I would make my way to the food court, and then we'd walk around for 3 hours, and then I'll call our parents on a payphone to pick us up, and it was the best night of the week. Right?
Hot Topic, dude, I forgot you kind of gothy. Like, that's the untold story of Caitlin Corrigan, right?
Yeah, back in the day. You can't tell now, but there's some tattoos under this clothing.
There's some mistakes. Yeah, sure. We've all been there. But yeah, I mean, so that makes me really sad. It breaks my heart to think, Brady, my son, who's turning 11, he'll be 11 in like 5 days, crazy, that he'll never have those moments, right? He'll never have those experiences. And, because now the food court is empty. Like the mall still exists, right? The buildings are still there. But you go now and it's like empty, quiet, dusty, echoey. Like it feels kind of unsafe. Like maybe not all the lights are on. You go around a dark corner, you're not sure what's there, who's waiting for you. Like maybe there's a Kohl's that's still like kind of half open, And it just feels so empty. It's so dark and it feels haunted, certainly, but not necessarily by ghosts, but rather by choices. And it all seemed to happen so quickly, this boom to bust. But what are those choices? What happened? Who's to blame? And I don't think anything's binary, but Was it Amazon? Was it the rise of online shopping? Surely, that's part of the story, but is it the whole story? I'm not sure, right? So what's killing our malls? What's killing our local economy? And outside of that, where did the jobs go? Like, who are they being replaced? Right? What was your first job, Kayla?
My first job was a Dippin' Dots at the local racetrack. So you remember like the beaded ice cream? It was the beaded ice cream of the future. But
yes, I know what Dippin' Dots are.
Yeah, but if it was stored incorrectly, it would all just mush together.
Right.
That was my first job. That was a lot of fun. A lot of angry customers. I wasn't very good at scooping, so.
Well, that's funny. That's a good lead-in because my first job was a super scooper at Baskin-Robbins. 31 flavors, baby. So.
It's always the novelty ice cream shop. That's where everyone's first job is.
Right? And I could still smell the waffle cones. I mean, it's like these memories, right, are so important to us. And again, it like highlights, right? You were at Dippin' Dots. I was at Baskin-Robbins. We were finding our way. It's this simple job, very accessible. Like the whole industry relied on workers like us. But I have to wonder, in the space that we're in the space that we continue to go into with AI and all the other pressures and online shopping and Amazon and conglomerates and everything else, it's like, dude, what is Brady's first job going to be?
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea. These jobs aren't being replaced. And I said, are they? I don't know. But I know for sure, like, he's not going to be folding polos at a Hollister, his first job. Like, that's not going to be his experience. Mm-hmm. So, I wanted to kind of dig into this. And I don't want to be dismissive of the massive complexity of our modern economy. I think a lot of things are happening at the same time. But I did want to have a conversation around one thing that I think is really prevalent in what's happening to our malls and to our cities and to our our economy and our culture. And it reminds me of that classic movie, that horror movie line where they say the call is coming from inside the house.
Yes.
You know that one?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's true, that the truth is behind the flashy headlines, right? We're being told to look over here, but really there's a blinking red light over here. And sometimes the truth is really darker than what we want to believe, and sometimes the snake eats itself.
So hold up there. So I'm just curious where you're going with this.
Well, yeah, weird intro, right? But I think you'll get it as we go along here. I want to tell you a story.
Okay.
I want to tell you a story about a brand that both you and I knew well and loved, and one that my son probably won't ever know. Right? Doesn't know now, never probably will know. And it's about Toys R Us. I think it was Jeffrey the Giraffe or something like that.
Jeffrey the Giraffe.
I mean, put yourself back in that mall. Toys R Us was like the anchor store, right? The big one, the bold one. Super bright, super loud. When I was growing up, I used to love that movie Big, and like my favorite scene, of course, is like Tom Hanks on the big piano, you know? And that wasn't a Toys R Us, but it was a very similar toy store. And that was kind of like full of nostalgia, always good vibes, good energy, lots of colors. And they had 1,500 stores, right? Mm-hmm. So they were everywhere. 11 billion annual sales and 100,000 SKUs, right? They were selling products of all sorts of shapes and sizes, bringing in big dollars. $11 billion is a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
And this is a place where middle-class parents would go and buy their kids their Christmas presents, and maybe sometimes even on layaway, right? You try to figure it out. It's Christmas Eve or the 23rd of December, and you're like, shit, I need one more thing for their stocking, or I didn't get them with a big present or whatever, and you go to the store, right? But then, as we know, Toys R Us is no more. It's gone.
I haven't seen them anywhere in the last few years.
No, it was fast, right? It was fast. Here they are, gone tomorrow. And it's not because buying patterns have changed. Kids are no longer paying with toys, right?
Yeah. I mean, now they're just on their phones or they're on their screens. It's kind of sad.
Well, there's that too, right? There's the shift to digital, but kids didn't stop playing and they didn't stop buying these toys, but they're just not buying them from Toys R Us. So what happened to Toys R Us? That's the story I want to tell you. And it involves Wall Street and a type of capital that a lot of our listeners might be familiar with, but not really sure how it works. And that's what I want to break down. So In 2005, Toys R Us was bought by 3 private equity firms, Bain, KKR, and Vornado, and they used billions in borrowed money to buy them. So they got a bunch of debt and they strapped it to Toys R Us like a bunch of dynamite. And then through their model, which I'll explain, they bled it dry. So we talked about they had 1,500 stores, 11 billion in annual sales, 30,000 people were employed by Toys R Us. All those jobs gone after they were bought by PE. No severance, no pensions, just done. And here's the piece that is one of the more shocking pieces. There's a lot of shocking pieces to the story, but the money that they used to buy the company came from pensions. A lot of the money came from workers' own pensions. So pension funds like my mom's, right? My mom was a teacher for 30 years. So when I say the call was coming from inside the house, what I mean is the call was coming from inside hers and perhaps your favorite firefighter or policeman's retirement account, right? So this revenue that was used that destroyed jobs of middle-class Americans was borrowed from middle-class Americans.
So if we zoom in on these institutions that you're talking about, right? So pension funds, I would imagine university endowments,
Yes.
insurance companies.
Yes.
What you're actually saying is, or what you're talking about is, this is your kid's teacher's pension,
Yes.
your neighbor's union retirement fund, your friend's student scholarship. So the money funding these buyouts isn't just about abstract capital. It's real people, the public workers, the retirees, the students. And I could imagine that most of them probably have no idea what they're bankrolling.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct. And I love the term of abstract capital. I think that's perfect, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. This isn't money that's like grows on trees. It's not just sovereign wealth funds, although they're invested in PE too. We'll talk about that. But yeah, it's like your neighbors, your neighbor was a teacher for 30 years. Your friend worked for GE and had a pension, and this is largely where that money's coming from. And it's not just about Toys R Us or a toy store or one store. Like this is a pattern. It's a practice. It's a playbook run over and over again. And it's so successful, not for the people who are investing in it, mind you, but for PE, for private equity, that it's expanding into new industries every day. So you'll hear about your local vet being bought by PE, your local rural hospital being bought by private equity, and media, childcare, housing. Like private equity is now getting interested in your local property management company. Right now, they're your landlord, right? And I want to be super fair. Like private equity is a huge group of companies. It's a massive amount of capital. We'll talk about that too. And I want to caveat, as people are listening to this, I don't want to paint private equity with one broad stroke and say what happened to Toys R Us, as I'll explain it to you, isn't necessarily the only model. It was the model that was leveraged here. And I want to be fair, on that, and I openly invite, and I have reached out to some private equity firms that we know, hey, help me tell the counterbalance to this story. This is one story. What's your story? If you're in PE and you're a B Corp, for instance, and there are B Corp PE companies, how do you do it differently? How do you approach it? Because I would like to broaden the conversation, as we move on and on future episodes of Ethical Exits. But today, I want to tell this story through Toys R Us, and I want to talk about the model that they were used here that is fairly common, and how it eats the middle class and calls it growth. So
yeah, because I can imagine that not all PE firms are built the same, right? So we don't want to put all of that industry sector into the same bucket, because you have a few bad eggs really in any type of industry sector, right? There's always people that maybe don't have the best intentions and are just looking out for themselves. But to your point, we are familiar and know a lot of great PE companies, specifically B Corps out there, that are doing some really good in the world. So I'm glad you spoke on that.
Yeah, right. And nothing is binary, and there are bad actors, and we want to be fair. So just to preface that, but this is what we're going to be breaking down today. It's how do PE, how does it work? who are the how, the why, the who, and what do they do with Toys R Us, in particular using that as a model, right? So let's start with the basics. Okay, Caitlin.
Okay.
I'm going to go into some detail, and I apologize, but I think it's important, right? If we don't understand how the capital works, who the players are, what the models are, then it's just going to things are going to continue to happen to us, right? Rather than for us. So let's start with the basics. Okay, so private equity firms raise massive investment funds, huge pools of money, from what called limited partners or LPs. Okay. And as we were discussing just a moment ago, that includes pension funds, university endowments, insurance companies, and sovereign wealth funds. Institutions that are just sitting on oceans of capital. I mean, this, like, remember that Daffy Duck or whatever his name was when you jump into a pool full of, like, coins, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's that shit.
Yes. Yeah. Scrooge McDuck.
Yeah, Scrooge McDuck, right? It's that. So in 2023, from what I could find, and we could put this in the show notes too, like all the different sources, but private equity globally managed more than 13 trillion with a T in assets.
Wow. Right? That is so much money.
It's ridiculous, right? So it's like stupid. Like once things get above like a couple, billion, like it's hard to even imagine what that looks like, right? I mean, keep in mind, $1 million. If you're making $1 million a year, that means you're making $88,000 a month in salary, right? Wow. So we're not talking a million. We're not talking a billion. We're talking trillions of dollars in assets. So that's a super big number. It represents nearly half the size of the entire U.S. economy.
Whoa.
And more GDP than Germany and Japan combined, or roughly 4 times the amount of credit card debt held by Americans.
And let me just get this straight. And this money, it's just floating around waiting to be deployed? That sounds crazy.
It's nuts, right? And PE is obviously in a position where they're getting a high percentage of funds that need to be moved, funds that are looking for an ROI, right? So you think about insurance companies, right? How do insurance companies work? They're saying, cool, pay us $100 a month. And if anything happens, we'll pay out up to $100,000 in insurance coverage. What? That's a big gap. So they need to figure out a way to be able to pay for their liabilities. And the same thing with pension funds, right? Maybe my mom only paid in, I don't know, let's just use an easy number just to digest, $20 every week for a teacher's salary, nothing. And now, fast forward, all these decades later, well, she's not expecting to get $20 a week back, right? There's pressure on these sources of funds to find a way to make a return or to increase the value of those held assets, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the primary ways that they deploy it, all this cash, is they buy companies, mergers and acquisitions, full takeovers, right? But here's the thing. This is wild. Private equity firms don't raise this money with a mission. Maybe that's not that wild. Their only goal is just to find a return on capital.
Make a profit.
But they certainly don't promise to build great companies or to create good jobs. There's no commitment to longevity or stewardship or community. It's all about a singular promise. We'll get you a return. That's the whole game, right? Mm-hmm. And everything else, employees, operations, legacy, impact, is collateral at its worst, right? I mean, it's really seen as a vehicle to drive returns for their customer base.
Because I can imagine that they're going to try to make that return no matter what they have to do along the way to make it happen. So it's like, give us your capital and we'll turn it into more capital, but don't ask us any questions on how we do it.
Or don't care about what we break. So that's one of the best definitions I ever heard of private equity, is that private equity isn't designed to build a business. It's designed to harvest them.
Ooh, zinger.
Right?
That's a good one.
Dirty, right? Mm-hmm. So the firms themselves, these PE firms themselves, call themselves general partners or GPs. So you have the limited partners, they provide the capital, and then the firms themselves are the general partners. In a deal, this is where it gets, you're starting to get into some math and some like really crazy numbers. In a deal, they typically put in only 1 or 2% of the fund's own capital into deals, right? So they're like, cool, Yeah, yeah, LP, yeah, pension fund, insurance company. You give me 98 or $99, and I'll put in $1 or $2 for this $100 buy, right?
Okay.
So they're investing very, very little skin of their own capital into these deals, and the rest is provided by the LPs. But as you said, the GPs are in charge. They're making all the decisions on who to buy, how to structure them, when to sell, or how to cut. They are a full, all-inclusive partnership where they just take your money and then they decide what to do with it.
So
Yeah.
if I'm understanding this correctly, they bring in the money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They provide very little out of their own funds into these deals, but then they still have the upper hand. They're the ones calling the shots. How does that work?
Yeah, that's PE. That's the model. And it's really good to be private equity. They secure a bunch of investors, people who are hungry for returns. They control how it's spent with very little risk to their own cash. And of course, they get paid really well to do it. Right? That's why it's so popular and why there's so much PE out there, so many companies, so much money being invested. So they take a bunch of money from all these sources that we talked about. It's capital from people that we know and love, real people. And then they go out and buy companies and they put a very small percentage of their own money into these deals. So now that you know how that works, how it raises money, let's talk about how they actually buy companies. So how do they structure these deals? This is really, really important. You didn't start your business just to sell something. You started it to solve something. But solving big problems with limited resources, it's slow, it's hard. And in a market moving this fast, values need more than vision. They need velocity. This is the kind of challenge Up and Over Advisors was born to solve. We help mission-driven companies scale smarter through values-amplifying acquisitions. Because when ethical founders grow, capitalism gets an upgrade. We do the heavy lifting to find and qualify companies ready to partner or sell to someone like you. We don't just close deals, we open doors to broader impact. Ready to scale yours? Let's build the future on purpose. Visit upandoveradvisors.com to learn more. Preface. Not all PE is the same. Sure. Right? We hope to get into that more. We'd love to talk to somebody from PE who could tell us their side of the story or how they might do this differently. But one of the most common tools in the PE playbook is something called a leverage buyout. And the acronym for that is LBO. In a leverage buyout, the PE firm buys a company, but not with the money that they have in their capital fund that they got from their LPs or from this tiny percentage they put in themselves. They use mostly borrowed money. Okay.
So the company is essentially buying itself.
Well, exactly, because they borrow money in the name of the company that they're buying. So they put in a little, they get the most of it, most of the capital that they do use from their partners, and then they borrow the rest, but they put all the debt in the name of the company they're buying.
So if anything was to happen to the company, like if they were to go bankrupt or they had to liquidate their assets, they would be on the hook for it versus the private equity firm. Wow.
Right. So the company is basically paying for the benefit of being bought at the end of the day. So it's kind of like, put this in general terms. It's like you buy a house, right? You buy it with a mortgage, principally. I mean, you put down some money, right? Just like the PE firm does. They put a little bit of money down, most of it borrowed from, or, leverage from the LPs. And then they get the rest in a loan. But the loan is not in the PE company's name. It's in the house's name, right? So instead of you being on the mortgage, the house, the address, the property is on the mortgage, but you get the deed and the keys.
Okay.
Well, hell, let's do that. I mean, that sounds pretty freaking good, right? So let's say there's a PE company that wants to buy a business for $1 billion. How does this actually work? How does the money flow? So they don't write $1 billion check from their own pocket, but the seller does get the full $1 billion, usually in cash at closing. This makes it like wicked attractive, right? You and I know you've been talking about this on your M&A 101 blog series, which is so excellent. You've done such a good job there. There's so many different ways to structure a deal.
Mm-hmm.
One way is cash. Another way is through seller financing or earnouts. There's all sorts of different ways you do equity, right? There's all sorts of different ways you can do it. But for PE, what makes it so attractive for companies is like, boom, I can sell to this PE company and I get cash the next day, all in one lump sum. Bang.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that
sounds
attractive.
like a good deal. Yeah.
Right.
On paper.
Right. So the seller gets the money at closing, and that money, again, comes from a mix of $200 million, right? And this $1 billion example comes from the PE fund. But only like $2 million of that is PE money, right? 196 of it, right, is from the LP. And then $800 million in borrowed money. And that $800 million in debt, though, again, does not go on the PE books. It's directly loaded onto the company they just bought. So the business, the thing that was just sold, is now responsible for paying back the debt it used to purchase itself. What?
Okay, so let me get this straight. So,
yeah,
like as an example, the way I'm interpreting it is it's like selling someone your used car.
Mm-hmm.
They pay you in full for it, no problem. Everything seems great. But then you find out that they financed it by taking out a loan against the car itself. And now you're the one on the hook for the payments.
Yeah, the car has to figure it out, right? So yeah. So it's a really interesting model.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very, very low risk, obviously, for the PE firm, right? High risk for the business itself, and high risk also because of that setup for the LPs who put in 80 to 90% of the cash that wasn't borrowed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's the setup, right? Holy shit, right?
Wow.
That's like, woo, there's a lot of cards being stacked, right? I hope this goes well. So once that debt is in place, the pressure begins. So now this company, this business that was probably profitable before, right? In order to be an attractive acquisition opportunity, you have to kind of have some margin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is suddenly spending, in this scenario, tens of hundreds of $1 million every year just to service this debt, this new debt. So the cash that used to go to making the company better, right? Improving, right? New products, employee raises, customer experience, long-term investments. They can't do that anymore. So even if the business was healthy before, now under this model, it's suffocating under debt, under this LBO leverage buyout deal structure. They're not advancing the company. They're just trying to service the debt that was taken on through this acquisition. And a big chunk of its margins now goes straight to interest payments, which in effect goes straight to Wall Street, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that also is distributed in lots of different ways. So, okay. So now we know how the deal structure works. We know where they get their money. So how does PE get paid? And why do ongoing profits no longer matter for the business they bought?
Mm-hmm.
So now they own the company. How do they get paid? So the story is already nuts. I know, right? This is kind of wild when you break it down. I think this is why we should really break it down.
Mm-hmm.
But the truly wild part about how this model works and why private equity is everywhere is because the health of the company and the return on the deal are not the same thing. In any other scenario, you would think that the health of the company is directly tied to the ROI, right? But in this model, you can have a business that's completely falling apart,
Mm-hmm.
and the private equity firm that still owns it, they're still walking away with millions.
It's wild to me, right?
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that they don't need to make the company successful to make a return,
Mm-hmm.
aka millions of dollars. So how do they do that?
So here's how. It's pretty, a genius model on their behalf, right? So first they charge management fees.
Mm-hmm.
That's just for owning the business. Then come transaction fees
Mm-hmm.
for doing their job. for moving the money, for financing, for selling, for refinancing, or even helping the company make this acquisition, right? So there's management fees and there's transaction fees. But the big move is something called a dividend recap. And that is where the PE firm makes the company take on more debt. So they make them finance the deal again, right? Like maybe take out like you take out like a HELOC on your house, right? You have your primary mortgage, now you have a secondary mortgage. And that is then used to pay themselves, the PE firm, a cash dividend. So they've layered on all these fees, all these revenue streams. They've diversified it to the max that they get paid on regardless of how the company's balance sheet actually looks. So no new product, no new growth, just pure extraction. Right?
Wow.
They're taking this body parts, dude, and then they're asking it to bring on new parts of the body, and then they take that too.
So they're just trying to make a quick buck. Because from what I know, the average lifespan of a company under private equity is 5 to 7 years, right? And that doesn't seem like a long enough time to take a successful company and make it even better.
Right. To turn around a company or to completely change their model, their business model, so they can compete in this brand new e-commerce world. Right? No, definitely not. Right. So it's all about short-term games because you remember they're taking money from people, from pension funds, insurance companies. They're hungry. They have large urgency. There's a lot of pressure on them to make ROI, right? And that's what they told them they would do. So even if the company starts to struggle or fails altogether, the way that they've built their fee structure, private equity firm has already gotten paid. Right? It does not matter. They've completely decoupled it. So there's no incentive to help the company succeed. Profitability and ROI of the investment they're on two different tracks. In the model that's underneath this, and what I wanted to explain too, because you might hear this terminology, the 2 and 20 model. Okay. But it's maybe not every model every single PE firm uses, but it's certainly one of the most popular ones. So the 2 and 20 model, 2% of the total fund is paid to the PE firm every year, no matter what. So that's like a commission, right? 20% of the profits, if there are any. So if the company is turning any kind of margin at all, they get that too. That goes straight to the private equity company. And that's called carried interest.
So they get paid even if they do nothing. And then if the deal does end up working out, it's like they essentially get a huge bonus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like you're paying your kid an allowance before they've done chores. They still get paid. But then if they do a good job, then you give them a little bit of extra money, you buy them an ice cream cone. It's like that kind of thing, right? So, and then there's another additional twist with the tax code.
Okay.
And this is how structures are built, how structures maintain, right, Caitlin? This is where the real power is, right? So that 20% carried interest income, right, where they're taking 20% of any profits. It's taxed as capital gains, not as ordinary income. And what that means is that a private equity executive could be pulling in 20 million or more, and then because of how that's taxed, that those dollars are taxed, they could be paying a lower tax rate than their assistant or my kid's teacher or your firefighter down on the street.
Wow. So they're not only using public pension to essentially gut the companies, if you want to use that term, they're also paying less in taxes while doing it. So you're making out every single way. Doesn't matter.
Yes. Every single way. And it's important to highlight again, to double click, that a lot of these pension funds are already underfunded. They can't meet their liability and they're chronically underfunded. So there's just enormous pressure to chase outside returns. So these pension funds, these insurance companies, they're taking on risk, right? Their risk tolerance is much higher. And to try to find these returns, these outside returns, even if it means they're fueling a model that's hurting the very people they're supposed to support. So that is why I said the snake is eating its own tail. It's circled back around. And the very people you're trying to help are the people and the lives that you're destroying through this model, through this bet, through this risk.
Yeah, so it's like that saying, well, I guess it's not a saying, but like capitalism's washing machine. And it's like, so you ultimately benefit the class or the middle class, right? These are the folks that we're talking about who, the pensionaries. And then I'll have to screw over this other group of similarly grouped people. So it's essentially like a zero fun game.
Zero fun for sure.
Yeah.
Zero fun.
And zero fun.
I mean, except for these PE guys, right? I mean, guys and gals, So exactly. So, and I love that term, capitalism's washing machine, because I think it's really cute and it's really meaningful when you break it down that way. And it's like, oh my God. So the PE firm is using money from the middle class to squeeze out other parts of the middle class. And then they're paying a lower tax rate than the people they're putting out of work, right? Like, what?
It's crazy.
So
it sounds
it's
illegal.
So lopsided.
Yep.
Sounds illegal, right? Well, you would hope, right? If there was morality baked in. But here's another reason why it's stacked this way. 88% of people in Congress today, Caitlin, are taking money from private equity firms. So that's both sides of the aisle, sis.
It doesn't surprise me.
But we'll come back to that because there's some things happening there. But it's important to note, 88%, right? So they're making money. They're winning their seat, right? Because advertising and running for office is not inexpensive. They're on the PE payroll. So we'll come back to that. But let's get into what I promised.
So do you think that that's influencing how? And you think about it too, right? Congress is public servants, right?
Should be.
They should be. But the majority of the people in Congress are all multimillionaires. And then when you look into how they're making a majority of that money, it makes you wonder how much PE influence and insider knowledge and insider trading are they doing. But that's a discussion for another time.
Dude, that is a whole other episode, okay? I think that might be a whole other podcast series, like a platform. Follow the money. But anyway, let me get into what I promised, right? Let's talk about Toys R Us. Like, what happened here? So, how do they get caught up in these PE crosshairs? Because, as I said at the top, right? Like, they weren't some scrappy little startup, right? But, I mean, they were a retail powerhouse. They had a brand out to the wazoo. Everyone knew Toys R Us. They're the player, right? Early 2000s, Toys R Us was doing $11 billion in revenue. They had over 1,500 stores. They were a category killer, right? Big firm expertise, values, big firm impact. At Impact GC, we've traded the traditional law firm playbook for one built on purpose and trust. As a pending B Corp, member of 1% for the Planet, and certified carbon neutral law firm by We Are Neutral, we help mission-driven businesses grow, protect their purpose, and lead with confidence. We're here to make the complex simple and the legal work human. Let's build what matters. Visit impactgclaw.com to learn more. They were the Amazon of toys before Amazon, right? So why sell?
Yeah, why would a business need private equity then? That's so successful.
Yeah, and that's a good question, right? And the short answer, and I'm sure there's lots of different components to this, but the short answer is that they were losing ground, and they knew it. The market was changing, just like what happened in Belgium, right? There's more competition in the market, and it costs more money for you to still hold that top placement. So in the late 90s and the early 2000s, two big things happened. Walmart and Target, those brands, they started aggressively moving into the toy market, offering lower prices and massive convenience. Because there's Targets and Walmarts, you can go to the grocery store and also pick up a couple toys. You don't need to go to a specialty store, right? And Toys R Us had fallen way behind in e-commerce. It's kind of like the Netflix Blockbuster thing. It's like, dude, no one's gonna, order their movie on a CD and have it shipped to their. No, yeah, they do it, dude.
So sad that the synergy behind all of our childhood memories and how they all ultimately just imploded. But keep going. This story is getting more interesting.
Oh, thank you. So they were falling way behind. Amazon was gaining steam, selling online. As we know, we both have a background in e-commerce and working with Amazon brands. We still work with buyers that are in the Amazon ecosystem space. It's not like brick and mortar commerce, right? There's a whole different level of specialties and digital advertising strategy and the algorithms and the rules and all the stuff. So you fall behind. It's very hard to catch up, and it costs money, right? So even though they were still a giant, they were struggling to adapt. And this is where good companies fail, right? So they need capital, right? They need to modernize their stores. They need to invest in online infrastructure and fight off these big box online retailers and big box other brick and mortar retailers. And that's when That's
when the PE came in with its cape, here to save the day.
Right. Because what other buyer, bud, can buy a company that big, right? Or can infuse it with as much capital as it needs. So in 2005, a trio, as I mentioned, of private equity firms, Bain Capital, KKR, and Vornado Realty Trust stepped in with a turnaround. You know, they came in with like, we can modernize your business, and yeah, we got a bunch of capital and cash and stuff. We'll just pay you like right away, and we'll make you competitive again. Like we'll be your savior, right?
But it's like, don't read the fine print, and I can guess in the scenario, those 3 private equity firms didn't bring much of their own money to the table. Is that true?
Exactly. So they used this model that we talked about earlier, the 2 and 20, and they put in a very small amount of capital. The rest comes from their LPs, and then the rest they borrow. So the deal is huge, $6.6 billion LBO, leverage buyout. And as you know from how I described how this works, that's when the trouble began. So they didn't bring much money of their own to the table, and they strapped on a bunch of debt. So only of the $6.6 billion, right? Only $1.3 billion was equity. So that's from the GPs, or the GP and the LPs, right? The cash they put into the deal. The majority of that 1.3 coming from the LPs, from the pension funds and insurance companies and university endowments. The rest, roughly $5.3 billion BBB, was borrowed. And not in their name, in Toys R Us's name. And those are liabilities you have to pay, right? Like, you can't miss your payment on your freaking jumbo loan, or you lose your house, right? So overnight, this business that was like, dude, we need to turn this around or we're going to be Blockbuster, it was now coughing up $400 million per year in interest payments.
Wow. Right? So they were throwing a life raft, and now that life raft has a big hole in it, and they're sinking.
Yes, exactly. So that capital that they should have be using to competing with Amazon was now just used to service this debt. They couldn't innovate, they couldn't invest, so they entered a slow, painful death spiral. So, in the PE firm, you think they're very nice about it? No, dude, they're not like investing their own cash. So there's layoffs, there's store closures, there's declining customer experience. And this isn't accidental. This was designed from the very beginning. I don't know what they'd say, but like to talk to the people behind this deal or these types of deals and be like, so what? I mean, how does that feel, right? To know that the second the debt hits their books, the fuse to this bomb was lit, right?
Wow. So all of this, it wasn't accidental.
No.
So
no.
It wasn't a rescue mission. It was a hit job at the end of the day.
Right. I mean, 100%. So the private equity firms weren't trying to save the business. They were there to harvest it. They got paid up front. Remember, they charged their management fees, their advisory fees, their transaction fees. They even charged to refinance the company's own debt. So it's like, okay, you can't pay your mortgage payment. Okay, well, let's take out another mortgage, right? To help you pay those $400 million a year, right, just to service a loan. So in total, the private equity company extracted, and I'm using that word specifically, nearly $460 million from this company, from this transaction, before Toys R Us ever filed for bankruptcy.
Wow. So they made nearly $500 million to ultimately just destroy my childhood memories.
Yeah, basically. That's the model they that they designed, right? They, big they, the model they used, and the model worked, right? So, and don't forget that original 1.3 billion that they used in cash and their own equity, that came from public pension funds, teachers, firefighters, civil servants, the same communities where stores were gutted. These communities, like you said, like our memories, those realities, those good times, right? Hanging out with friends and, drinking orange Julius, looking at all the toys, or going through the, the aisles and, maybe picking up some cucumber melon lotion. Those same people are impacted when those companies close.
Yeah, so ultimately we can assume that maybe there was some folks, specifically in Toys R Us, that not only lost their job, but unknowingly also helped bankroll the deal.
Yeah. Right. I imagine that there was being a teacher is a hard job and doesn't pay a lot, right? So you need maybe a summer job. Maybe some of those people at Toys R Us that lost their job, the 30,000 people that lost their job when Toys R Us went bankrupt, maybe they're also teachers, right? Trying to supplement their income. That's not, I don't think, a highly unusual or not realistic scenario, right? So again, it's the snake eating its own tail. They took middle class money, used it to destroy middle class jobs, and walked away with preferential tax treatment.
And like I said before, how is this even legal?
Exactly. That takes us to Capitol Hill. That's the next part of the story, and that'll help explain why it's legal. But before we get there, here's what I really want folks to take away from this episode, Caitlin, and what I didn't understand about PE. And there's actually a great book. It was written by Megan Greenwell, where she talks about private equity. It's the company. The book name is Bad Company: Private Equity and the Death of the American Dream. Banger. Really good expose. And she talks a lot about the things that we talked about here. And so if people are curious, they're interested, I would definitely recommend that. There's, of course, all sorts of other books that have been written about it. But what I want folks to take away is that much of the equity Bain and KKR and Bordado used came from these funds, right? So retirement savings were used to buy a company that then loaded it with debt and gutted it and run it to the ground, causing other people to lose their own jobs, livelihoods, and perhaps their own dreams of retirement. What?
So that's just straight up economic cannibalism.
Dude, yes, it's like end stage capitalism. Our hunger for growth is so insatiable. And when we decouple ROI from profits, it is capitalism's washing machine. Public money goes in, that's desperate for a return, has a hard time finding it elsewhere. Financial returns come out, but not for them. And in the spin cycle, you have real communities, jobs, and futures getting hung out to dry. Right? Because did these funds get paid back? No.
Yeah. If this model is so obviously broken, why has nobody stopped it or has stepped up?
Yeah, right. Well, and largely, and again, this is a nuanced answer, right? There's lots of things here, but I think largely what you can point to is because private equity doesn't just influence the economy. When they have a huge outside influence, right? They're managing so much money, $13 trillion, but they also own the game board. So 88% of Congress having taken campaign money for private equity industry. And then there's the infamous carried interest loophole, right? Where PE firms get to pay capital gains tax around 20% on what is usually just ordinary income. So they're getting paid more than, your teacher. So there's a lot of power wrapped into that, and a lot of reasons why people don't want it to change who would have the power to make a change, which brings me to one of my favorite senators, Senator Elizabeth Warren. She has written legislation. She's been struggling to get it out of committee for years, with both parties in power. It's called the Stop Wall Street Looting Act. Have you heard of this?
I have not. Can you tell me what it's about?
So effectively what the bill would do are a couple things that would be huge and would change the game outright, right? Would make these kind of practices illegal. Like, no, you can't do that and walk away unscathed, right? Like, that's not chill. So make PE firms responsible for the debt they loaded into companies. So you can't put the debt on the company name. You have to take that risk on your own investment against your own capital fund. That's like, bang, okay, that would be huge because that's the big major decoupling between ROI for them and the health of a company. If they bury it in debt, to end the carried interest loophole. So they have to pay taxes on that. That would also be a huge solve. And the appropriate amount of taxes on that. They have to prioritize workers and pensions in bankruptcies. So the way that it happens now, when a company goes through bankruptcy, the pension fund and the workers, they're at the last of the line, right? So you think about that waterfall of like, okay, I have $100 left. I owe $25 in fees, and I owe $70 to the loans. And then I have $5 left that goes to the workers and the pension. So she wants to flip that, where the people that are most vulnerable, they get paid out first, not last, right? Even if they don't recover everything, they're still higher up in the food chain. And to your point, it's hidden in the fine print to force transparency around fees and risk, right? So instead of just having this document where everything's likely spelled out, but not in ways that like really calls attention to it. Mm-hmm. And certainly there's no like risk assessment at the end of the deal where, where even these private equity firms had to go back to their LPs and say, hey, we want to buy Toys R Us. Here's the chance that this is going to totally fail. We're going to lose all your money.
Okay. So this all seems like common sense stuff to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I mean, it makes a ton of sense when you think about who's winning and who's losing in these deals, right? Over and over again. But it keeps getting buried because, again, the folks who would vote on it are funded by private equity and they're on both sides of the aisle. So it just continues to persist.
I guess, then you want to also look at the bill from a different lens, right? It would negatively affect the PE firms, but then in turn, you would think that the triple ripple down effect would be that if you put all of these new regulations in place, then it would ultimately affect those pensioners, right?
Yeah. And force better deals, right?
Force better deals, now, yeah. It sounds good on paper, but...
Well, to your point about triple bottom line, let's let's use that term then and compare it to triple bottom line businesses.
Okay.
We know when companies do the right thing, when they lead with values and mission, it's not the soft stuff and it's not cost centers, it's an accelerant. Those companies are more profitable and they're more resilient, right?
That's true.
So we know companies who are doing it the right way, right? When methods and means are equal to what they're trying to do, they benefit from that. So I think that the same would be true in this scenario. PE is benefiting from doing everything that's predatory in these deals. I don't think that's the only way they can win. I think there's enough win for everybody, right? They just have to be incented to try a different way. We have to build a different model, right?
That's true.
And this, again, is like race to the bottom economics. Now, what Toys R Us is done, all these other companies are done, our communities are slowly dying. They're not going to be able to extract that much longer. The snake is eating its own tail. Pretty soon, there's like no tail left, rather than a regenerative approach to how we build and share wealth.
Yeah. And you're right. I like to bring up that point because conversations like this are really nuanced. But to your point, at the end of the day, when you just bring it down to your values and your mission and just inherently doing stuff for the greater good of humanity and people, things ultimately tend to work out.
Yeah, exactly. And we all play a role in that, right? We can demand better. We can get smarter, right? Which is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to learn about these financial models, how the capital moves, who the players are, what really happens here, and share it, right? We're trying to amplify this knowledge. We're trying to get louder about it. We're asking questions. Certainly, we vote, right? We follow the money. We continue to show up. And a large part of our mission is like, buyers wanted, baby. And we want more people to be playing this game of M&A. It doesn't have to be pension funds where the only option is to load in a bunch of their capital into these really risky models with PE. Like, where's the triple bottom line? Where's the profits for all? Where's the regenerative M&A? Where is M&A is the resistance? How do we protect each other from these LBOs, from these buyouts, by stepping up for one another? for us taking on risk, for us leveraging our own capital,
Mhm.
right? To build better, to scale good. And I think that pension funds, there's lots of different ways, there's lots of different levers, but pension funds can certainly demand impact mandates for their capital.
Mm.
They can say, like, we're not going to give you any money unless you guarantee X, Y, and Z, right?
Mm-hmm. Put it in the underwriting.
Yes, put it in the underwriting, like exactly through the finance and capital models, right? So there are ways where we can prioritize people and profit and people and purpose alongside profit. Profit doesn't have to be the only lever. It doesn't have to be just about ROI for the PE firm. There are different ways. We just have to talk about it, get in front of it, ask questions, and be creative and work together.
Mm-hmm. And it starts small, right? I think people, when they hear a story like this, it's really overwhelming because it's like, what can we do? How can we fight this structure? How can we change it? How can we redistribute the wealth that the middle class and the workers of America that this country is built on, right?
Yeah.
They deserve to see an ROI on themselves and the hard work that they put in. But it starts with small little changes. It doesn't have to be all at once, which I think can be a lot for people to digest. But even just little tweaks and having this conversation, because 10, 20 years ago, people weren't as informed as they are now, especially with the economic state and all the chaos that the world is going through right now. It's like, how can we do little things to make bigger changes down the line and to make changes for our kids and for the future, to come? That's what we have to think about.
Yes. And no one's coming for us. So people need to sell. Businesses need to sell. Businesses need capital to grow, to evolve. Pension funds need returns. Insurance companies need returns. University endowments need returns. But how do we get there? That part is up to us. We can build a model. But in order to build a model, we need to participate in the model.
So it's just reinstilling that confidence in folks that it's not as complicated as it sounds, right? It's actually fairly simple. The PE firms right now are like controlling us like marionette dolls. How can we keep our power back? And it starts with providing other options that don't involve, private equity, or it does involve private equity, but it involves private equity companies that are looking out first and foremost for the people, for the legacy, and for a lot of the times the mission that these companies have been built on and stand for.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. So, and we can do that. We can build a better model, and we can do that on purpose. We can do that together, and we can do that through our actions. M&A can be activists. Who we sell to can be activists. How we scale and grow our own companies can be activists. And, as our friend, Brenna Davis, she's the lead over at Organically Grown Company. They're the first company, I believe, on planet to go to a perpetual purpose trust. Patagonia followed their lead. Really wonderful person. She's going to be on Ethical Exits at a future episode. Really look forward to talking to her. But she likes to remind us that the future is still unwritten. This isn't done, man. It doesn't have to continue this way either. We hold the pen. We can rewrite this. We can demand better. And like you said, we can do something about it.
I love that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's what I wanted to share, Caitlin.
That was a very interesting story. I saw Toys R Us closing its doors a few years ago, and I always thought to myself, what happened there? But you never got the full context, and nobody was really talking about it. So I'm glad that we're using our platforms to discuss these stories.
Well, thanks for listening, Caitlin. Thanks for learning alongside me.
Well, thanks, Hannah. You're a fabulous storyteller. Add that to your resume.